If I had to choose just one muscle group to copy and paste onto a complete beginner with the goal of making them look as big and as aesthetic as possible, it wouldn't be the chest and it wouldn't be the biceps. It would be a big, juicy, round set of delts. Pound for pound, fiber for fiber, the deltoids have the most impact on the appearance of size and aesthetics on a physique. First of all, they widen your silhouette and they create the illusion of that V-taper and they make your frame look bigger up top. 2, the tie-in makes your biceps and your triceps look so much better. And 3, if you can develop a rear delt really well, it creates a crazy look to your overall deltoids and improves your posture by a lot. So you look so much more athletic even when you're not doing anything. Here's a fun fact that surprises most people. By mass, the delts are actually the largest muscle group in the upper body. So when you build them properly, it completely changes your physique. And in this video, we're gonna break down how to do that step by step. We'll cover the anatomy of the delts, how to target each region, my favorite exercises for doing so, and form tips included, and then lastly, how to tweak these recommendations based on exactly where you are at in your fitness journey. My name's Amir Barber, I'm a chemical engineer and a fitness educator, and this is the Delts Masterclass. The first step in having an understanding of how to train a muscle effectively is understanding its anatomy. So the delts are commonly thought of as having 3 separate heads. We have the front delt, the middle delt, and the rear delt. Now, technically speaking, some studies have identified up to 7 distinct heads of the deltoids, which is a fun fact, but practically speaking, it doesn't really change how we train them. So for now, we'll refer to it as those 3 regions. Now, all 3 of these regions share the same insertion point on the deltoid tuberosity of your humerus. So your upper arm bone, okay? But these 3 regions originate from different places. The other end of them attach at different places. So the front delt attaches along your clavicle. Your side delt attaches on the acromion process, which is this little hook on the top of your scapula. And then your rear delt attaches along the spine of your scapula, so back there. So because of these different originations, these fiber orientations run in different directions and therefore pull your upper arm in different directions. So if we were to just consider my upper arm down by my side, my front delt would be best suited to pull my arm straight up. My side delt would want to pull out to the side, and my rear delt would want to pull back. So here's where things get a little bit messy. Okay, now the deltoid is kind of like a shell that wraps around your shoulder joint, but the shoulder joint itself is the most mobile joint in your body, and we have freedom for a lot of different motions. So let's specifically consider internal and external rotation, okay? So if we're considering the motion of me just raising my arm straight out to my side, you might be like, yeah, you said that's mid-delt, right? And if my arm were neutral or maybe even internally rotated, okay, yeah, my side delt's on top of this joint. It's best suited to pull the upper arm up. But if I go into a lot of external rotation, now my front delt's in the best position to move my upper arm up. So the degrees of internal and external rotation that you have during some specific movements can change which fibers are being targeted. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. And we'll revisit this concept later when we talk about actual training, but for now, I want to go through section by section of the delt, talk about each one specifically and how best to train them. So we're going to start with the front delts and work our way back. All right, now what do the front delts actually do? Well, as we already covered, if my arm were down by my side, it could pull my arm straight up. But if my arm were out here, it can also pull my arm across my body, and it could do everything in between that. Now, because of that, any kind of pressing motion, whether it's a flat bench or an incline or an overhead press, is going to involve the front delts. A good rule of thumb is that the higher that the incline goes, the more up you're pressing, the more front delts you're going to be working. If you're doing a pure horizontal press, like a flat bench press, your front delts will absolutely be contributing and receive some growth stimulus. However, your chest is also working to a significant degree. So that growth stimulus is kind of split between between the delts and the chest. So because of that, when we do an overhead press, the chest is taken almost entirely out of the equation, so that workload falls on the front delts. And this conversation's kind of ignoring the triceps a bit, but we'll assume that to be a constant. Also, it is worth noting that a part of your side delt will also help out with that overhead press, making it a decent exercise for them too. Now, the other way to train them directly is through front raises, and this can be especially helpful for people with elbow issues or cranky elbows, since the triceps and the elbow joints mostly taken out of the equation. And that's really the foundation of how you'd train the front delts most effectively, through overhead pressing and front raise variations. Now, that's the how. Whether you should do them is something that we will discuss later in the video. Let's move on to the side delts, which are the part of your delts that create that capped 3D look and are essential in the appearance of a broad set of shoulders. So what do the side delts actually do? Well, if you were to look at the textbook definition, it would say that they are primarily responsible for abduction of the shoulder, which is not wrong. It's just kind of a rigid definition that doesn't fully encapsulate what the side delts are capable of. Because remember, this shoulder joint has a bunch of degrees of freedom in its range of motion, so depending on your body's position, it can be suited to do other tasks outside of abduction. So let's take this variation of the lateral raise, for example. In this position, my hands are starting out in front of me, and I'm coming up and across my body. But because I'm very externally rotated and my side delt is on the top of the joint and in the best position to actually pull the upper arm bone in that direction, and because of the direction of the resistance, this is a side delt movement, but it's not cleanly shoulder abduction. So that's just a little layer of nuance. Now back to the important stuff. Okay, if you want to max out the growth of your side delts, you need some variation of a lateral raise, whether that's dumbbells, cables, or a machine. Anything can work as long as setup is correct and your form is good. And yes, pressing movements will target the side delts to some extent and grow them, but if you're looking to maximally grow them, throw in a lateral raise. So let's quickly run through some of the golden rules that apply to lateral raises, whether you're using dumbbells, cables, or a machine. And these golden rules, we're not getting into the nitty-gritty of each because that could be a separate video in and of itself, okay? We're just giving you overarching principles that apply to all three. Golden rule number 1, let all motion come from the shoulder joint. Hands down, the biggest mistake that people make with lateral raises is getting the rest of their body involved. Whether that's a little bit of a bounce in their knees, or generating momentum from their hips, or flexing and extending their spine, or a combination of all three, right? You want to avoid that as much as possible, all right? Because you're using other musculature that are not the delts to perform the movement. And I don't know about you, but if I'm doing a lateral raise, I'm really hoping that these things will grow. Okay, so you're best off just having all of that motion come from the shoulder joint. Imagine you're a statue and the only joint that you were blessed with is this one right here, and you can only rotate like this. Go ahead and do that. Okay, golden rule number 2, let's talk about upper arm positioning. And remember, your delt attaches to your upper arm, so that's why we're worried about where the upper arm is. But where should you raise it to? Should you raise it to here? Should you raise it to there? Okay, and the answer is it's individual specific. Everybody has slightly different structures to the actual deltoid muscle, whether it sits a little forward or a little bit more backward, and shoulder joints themselves. Okay, so because of that individual variation, you need to find what slot feels best for you. Now, the acceptable range is anywhere from like 45 to about 80 degrees of shoulder abduction or horizontal abduction. Okay, and let's just put the nerd terms aside for a sec, all right? If this is your arm straight out in front of you, and this is your arm straight out to the side, halfway between that and back is good. Just don't go too far back. Golden rule number 3 when you're doing your lateral raises is think out, don't think up. Okay, and what this indirectly gets you to do is use less traps. So let's just say I'm doing a lateral raise and I'm like, yeah, I really want to get these things up. Okay, well, once I get here, an excellent way to get them up, if that's what I care about, is shrugging my shoulders up. right? But when I do this motion, it's mostly traps doing that. And we want to keep the traps out of the equation, okay? So instead, if you think, man, I'm really trying to get them out towards the corners of the room, then all of a sudden your traps are not involved anywhere nearly as much and your side delts will get a better growth stimulus. So again, think out, not up. Okay, last up, we've got the rear delts. Just a quick note before we dive in. At the beginning of the video, I said if I had to copy and paste one muscle onto a clean slate of a physique to make them look as big as possible, it would be the deltoids. If I had to further narrow that choice down, I would choose the rear delts. I'm serious. They make that much of a difference in your physique. They make your shoulders pop out backwards, create that bowling ball look to them. They help your posture. They complete physiques. And the crazy part is, across the general population of lifters, it's the most underdeveloped head too, right? So this is a small muscle group that if you pay a lot of attention to, can make your physique look totally different. So what do the rear delts do? Well, they attach to your upper arm bone, but they originate from the spine of your scapula, so back here. So they can pull your arm down, they can pull your arm straight across, and they could do a lot of stuff in between. So because of that, they are very active in pull downs and rows, but if we want to target them maximally, we have to do some type of reverse fly around this area. It could be straight across or it could be straight down and a little bit across. But if you start going here, then your lat's gonna contribute very significantly. So you wanna kind of get away from keeping your elbow tucked. Now you can do these with a reverse pec deck or with cables or with dumbbells if you're leaned over, okay? And a lot of the same general rules as the lateral raises apply, they just have a slightly different flavor to them. Rule number one is nearly identical. Don't move the rest of your body. So let all of the motion come from that shoulder joint. Okay, so that's rule number one, nice, simple, the same. Rule number two, think out towards the corners of the room, not back, okay? And what tends to happen is if you think, I'm just trying to drive these back, is you start turning it into a row and pinching your shoulder blades together, and your traps and your rhomboids are responsible for pulling your shoulder blades together, okay? So to minimize that, if you just think out, not back, and everything's just moving around this pivot, you'll be good. Rule number three, know your range of motion. Okay, so we'll talk about two ranges. We'll talk about the beginning and the end, right? From here to here. So for the beginning, straight out in front of you is just fine. Okay, you can come slightly across if you'd like and if your cables allow, but I would say don't worry too much about this whole maximal stretch thing. Because when you go from here to here, almost all of that range of motion is coming from your scapula sliding around your rib cage. So remember, what your rear delt does is it pulls your humerus towards your scapula, right? So if both are moving at the same time, the length of the rear delt really isn't changing. So you're not really stretching the rear delt, you're stretching your traps and your rhomboids. So like for that reason, if you want to come a little bit further across, so be it. But if you start going all the way here, I'm not sure how much value you're actually getting out of that. I digress, okay? This is the starting range for the most part, but the more important thing is that when you get out to the side here, once your arm's pretty much straight out to the side, you can just call that the end range, okay? Because when you want to go back further, your shoulder blade is going to end up retracting and you're going to be using your traps and your rhomboids to do so. Or let's say it doesn't, then your shoulder just gets in this really weird, uncomfortable position and you might stress it out. Okay, I stressed it out a little bit there, ow. For simplicity's sake, once you get here, call that the end range. So now that we've covered the anatomy and how each of the heads work, here are my 3 favorite exercises to target the front, middle, and side delts. And again, we're gonna start with the front delts and work our way back. First up is the seated overhead press. This is going to be the cornerstone compound movement that's going to maximally grow the front delts, and it will also grow the mid delts and the triceps. A few key things to note here. You can use dumbbells, barbells, Smith machines, or machines, right? What those all have in common is that they are a seated variation. Okay, so you really want to be seated when you're doing a shoulder press because when you do them standing, one, you introduce a lot of other joints into the movement, your knees, your hips, and you have to manage balance and coordination of those joints, which takes away from the output of the delts. So just taking all of that out of the equation, sit down and do them seated. You'll be much more stable, which is a better environment to actually get more output and more motor unit recruitment from the delts, which is very important in terms of growth. Now let's go a layer deeper and talk about each of these variations. All right, and I'm gonna ding the dumbbell shoulder press a little bit. First, I will give it its flowers. It is an awesome movement because you could really choose and have freedom of arm path, so that may be great for people with shoulder joint issues that out here or out here just does not feel good for them, so they could tuck a little bit more and it's a little bit more shoulder friendly. That's a great aspect of it. However, if you start getting really strong at that movement pattern, getting the dumbbells and kicking them into position becomes a workout in and of itself, okay? Like if you're kicking 100+ pounds up to here and up to here, which I'm not saying it can't be done, it totally can. It's just there's a lot of room for things to go wrong there. I personally have seen my life flash before my eyes a couple times, and I'm well practiced at it. That's why I generally prefer a machine shoulder press or a barbell setup in a rack with the safety arm set at my bottom position. Okay, so you don't have to waste as much time and energy on getting into position, and it's generally safer. So let's talk about grip width. All right, and let's assume we're using a barbell or a Smith machine. Generally on machine shoulder presses, the grips are fixed. You might have some freedom in where you put your hands, but regardless, this stuff still applies, okay? So again, there's this optimal slot, this Goldilocks zone for each individual based on their structure, okay? But here's too hot. If you grab the bar too wide, you're severely limiting your range of motion at the shoulders. Pay attention to the range of motion that my upper arm goes through. So let's say I'm super wide out here and I can only go straight up and down, because remember, it's a barbell. We're not moving through much. Meanwhile, if I went in a little bit closer, let's say here now, a little bit wider than shoulder width, I can tuck all the way down, and I could also extend all the way up. So much more range of motion at the shoulder and working the delt through that full range of motion. Okay, now if you go way too close, like right here, one, you're gonna violate a later rule that we'll talk about, but two, it's gonna be very triceps dominant. So the Goldilocks zone is like start out about a little wider than shoulder width apart, you can go a little bit more out or stay right there, that's fine. But find what feels comfortable to you and where you feel strong, and just be consistent in that choice from workout to workout. One more thing about grip width, at the bottom of the rep, try having your forearms relatively vertical and your elbows below the bar. So what we don't want is our elbows drifting backwards, because that would be bad. Then the bar would literally fall forwards, okay? Or we don't want our grip to be so narrow here and then our elbows out in front of us and then kind of turning it into way more of a triceps dominant press. Now, this advice can change a little bit if you have an angle to your Smith machine, okay? Depending on the angle that you're going down at, okay? Like let's say if it's slightly tilted at this kind of angle, you'd actually want to keep your elbow joint in line with the path that the bar is traveling. Okay, so you actually wouldn't want to be under here in this case because you're pushing in this direction. Okay, hope that makes sense. So the last thing, when you do find that comfortable grip width, get down to the bottom, see where you can comfortably go, maybe put some load in your hand and see where you can comfortably go, okay? And once you figure that out, if you're sitting in a rack, okay, set the safety arms on that rack to that height. And similarly, if you're in a Smith machine, set the safety stops to that height. And what that's gonna do is a couple of things. One, you're not gonna have to worry about unracking and re-racking the Smith machine, okay? So that's great because you don't have to get your wrists all twisted up, which is really nice, okay? So that's one. But two, it serves as a reference point to make sure that you're not skimping yourself on range of motion. Because what tends to happen is as sets get really hard is that most people will start cutting off range of motion. So by knowing that the safety's set right here and you could see it plain as day, it keeps you honest. Next up, we've got my personal favorite, which is the lying cable lateral raise. If I just had to choose one side delt movement to do for the rest of my life, and that's all I could do, full stop, this is it. And yes, this is a little bit of setup and it takes some time to get just right. So I'm gonna link a video down below in the description that will walk you through the full setup. But I'm not gonna do that here, I'm just gonna talk about why it's my favorite. The first reason I love these is because we are lying down on a bench, okay? The weight from your torso more or less keeps it locked into place. So there's no swinging, cheating, but there's also no balance to manage, and it's extremely stable. And we know that the more stable a movement is to a point, the more motor unit recruitment you can get out of a target muscle, which is good for growth. So reason number one, very stable. Reason number two is the cuffs. So by using the cuffs instead of handles, we are taking all of the grip strength and all of the forearm musculature out of the equation, which keeps the effort and the motor unit recruitment exactly where it needs to be, on the side delts. And orthopedically, it just feels really nice. If you have any wrist issues, you'll like these so much more because it takes the wrist out of the equation, and overall, it just really lets you push the side delts to their limits. But where this movement really shines is the resistance profile. And what a resistance profile does, it describes the challenge to the joint at different parts of the range of motion. So the way that the physics of this exercise work is there's a ton of challenge down here and there's little to no challenge up here, which is awesome because forget about the exercise for a sec. Let's focus on your strength profile. What is your body anatomically capable of? Your delts can produce a ton of force from here to here. Okay, like if you were to put a scale on my delts, let's say if I could produce 100 pounds of force just pushing into this immovable scale, right? Maybe up here I can only make 20 to 30 pounds of force. Okay, rough approximation, but you get what I'm saying. I'm so much stronger down here than I am up here. So you would want an exercise to be so much more challenging down here as compared to up here. And what that actually creates in the gym, when you're looking at reps with a really nice matchup of resistance and strength profile, is when you start getting to those grinder reps, those failure reps, you will just have a perfectly smooth grinder rep all the way through because the resistance profile is matching what you're capable of throughout the range of motion. And this is different from something like a dumbbell lateral raise. And a dumbbell lateral raise is actually the complete opposite. There's almost no challenge up here, and there's a ton of challenge up here. So it's hard where you're weakest and easiest where you're strongest, which is why I prefer the cable lateral raises over the dumbbells. Now, that's not to say that you cannot grow an excellent set of side delts using dumbbell lateral raises. You absolutely can. But I think there's an argument to be made that this is a little bit more efficient. And last, but definitely not least, is the reverse pec deck for the rear delts. Now, of course, you can use cables, which I actually prefer to a lot of the time, or you could use dumbbells, but I recommended this for a few different reasons. One, it's very accessible and it's in almost every single gym. Two, it's very stable and has a good fixed range of motion. Three, it requires almost no setup, and setup time is something to take into account when you're programming for somebody. How practical is this? Now, here are a few quick tips to get the most out of it. One, once your chest is planted on that pad, do not move it for the rest of the set. So don't pull your chest off the pad when you're getting to the end of the rep. Tip number two, think out, not back. I've already explained that at length, so we'll roll right into tip number three, which I've also explained, is once you're straight out to the side, that's your end range. Now here's a little bit of sauce for you on this movement. If you find that when you're doing a cable crossover that you like this up to down kind of arm path and it feels really good for your rear delt, you can recreate very similar mechanics by scooting your butt back on the seat and planting your chest into that pad. And what that does is it changes the angle of your torso and your scapula relative to your upper arm. So you can kind of recreate it, you're just doing it on the reverse pec deck. So those are my three go-to movements for building each region of the delts. Next, let's talk about how to actually program these based on your physique and your goals. So up until this point, we've discussed the how. How do the delts work? How do we target each region? And how do we do these exercises? But now we're gonna go a layer deeper and answer the questions of, should we be doing all these exercises? Which ones should we do? And that is programming implications. And the answer to that question comes down to three main variables. One, what's your training status? Are you a complete beginner or are you a gym veteran? Two, where's your physique currently at and where's your development currently at? And 3, what are your goals, or where do you want to get to? All 3 of those are about to be broken down. Now, if you're a beginner or you're working with a beginner, just keep it simple. Focus on the compound movements. So if you have some type of chest press, then you throw in an overhead press, and you have some type of row or pull down, your delts are going to grow just fine. So if you're in that camp, just include an overhead press and call it a day. All right. And you might be like, but Amir, you said the rear delts are so important that I should focus on them. And I did say that. And if you're driven and you want to do that, then feel free to throw in a reverse pec deck or reverse fly, okay? But the key thing is, don't let that come at the expense of your compound movements. Like, don't sub out a rowing movement so that you could sub in a rear delt movement, okay? That's my 2 cents. It's like stepping over $1 to pick up a penny. Now, for intermediate and advanced lifters, things get a lot more individualized and they get a little hairy. And this is where your physique is really gonna impact your programming. So let's start off with a broad, generalized truth. Most intermediate to advanced lifters don't need more targeted front delt work. Just throwing it out there, okay? Generally speaking, the amount of people that I've come across where it's like, man, they really need to grow their front delts, that would just complete their look, very, very few. Now, if we're gonna flip that and talk about the rear delts, I think that all the time, right? And same thing with the side delts too. I'm not saying to not hit your front delts. I'm just saying it might be worth your time to allocate more of your effort and your hard sets towards your side and your rear delts. So let's back off that train of thought before people come at me with pitchforks, all right? I'm not saying you shouldn't train your front delts, but just on average, a lot of people should shift their focus towards other areas. But I digress. Okay, let's talk about some common genetic pairings that you'll see and just some scenarios. So let's say we have an advanced lifter who is genetically predisposed to have a massive chest. So when they're doing their horizontal pressing and maybe slight incline pressing, their chest is doing the thing. And by result, maybe their shoulders are contributing a little bit less. Now, in this case, I would tell them to just prioritize overall shoulder growth. So I'd want a good compound overhead press, I'd want a good lateral raise, and a rear delt fly. So I'd tell them to do all 3 of what we mentioned. Now let's talk about another common scenario, and this is especially prevalent in intermediate lifters. All right, so let's say you've been lifting for a couple of years, and when you first started, you just benched 3 times a week because it was fun, and it's the bench press, right? You can't go wrong with the bench press, or so we thought. Okay, so because of that, you have a developed chest, and you have strong front delts, but you didn't give your middle or rear delts much love. So we kind of have that flat look. If we look from the side, there's a big front delt, but when we look from the front, it's just flat. If that's the case, I might pull an overhead press out of their routine completely and just have them hammer lateral raises and rear delt flies. And I might target some of their back work or their rowing work to have a very high elbow position to also bias the rear delts. It's not like their front delts are just going to shrivel up from taking out the overhead press, okay? They're still picking up a stimulus from the chest stuff that they're doing, which I would not take out of their routine. Okay, but there's going to be enough of a stimulus there so they just maintain size, or maybe they shrink at a very, very, very slow rate. But sometimes it's about rebalancing the physique. Now I know what the next question is, which is how many sets should I do? And really, I cannot give you a good answer just based on where your program is. Like, are you training 3 days a week, 5 days, 4 days? How often are you hitting certain body parts? Are you doing a bro split or a full body split? Like, all of that stuff changes the answer pretty drastically. But here are some guidelines that can orient you in the right direction. First of all, I would not dump all of your shoulder work onto one day. I would spread it up over the course of the week, at least over 2 sessions. I think that's a good sweet spot. Second, if you're very gung-ho on growing them, I would spread out anywhere from 5 to 10 sets over the course of the week. So let's say you're like, I need side delts to come up, and let's just, to make things simple, say we're not doing an overhead press, you could do 3 sets on one day, 3 sets on another day. But if we are doing an overhead press on one day, we can be like, well, I kind of picked up some side delts, so maybe you do just lateral raises on a different day. So 3 sets and 3 sets. It's not perfect math, but you want to generally hit the muscle twice a week for a few sets. Then you also have to keep in mind you're getting a secondary stimulus from your chest movements and your rowing movements. And remember, this is all highly individual. So experiment on your own and kind of figure out what the good balance is for you. And generally speaking, when it comes to the volume side of things, start off on the low end. And if you're making progress, if you're getting stronger at those movements, stick on the low end of volume. And if you're not making progress, maybe up it just a little bit, but only to an extent. Okay, and you have to remember at the end of the day, this is all very individual and it's going to change from person to person based on your genetics, based on your training history, based on your current physique, based on your goals. And that's where coaching comes into play. Programming isn't just about blindly adding exercises. It's being very specific about the doses that you need to add in to achieve the goal that you want to achieve. And your goal might be different from somebody else. So all in all, that is the Delt Masterclass. I hope you've enjoyed, and if you have any questions, drop them down below in the comments, and until next time, peace.